Hello, this is Jay Kiefer for the Yellowstone Gateway Musuem, and you're watching or listening to Spotlight on History. Today we're talking to Lois Olmstead. She is the columnist for the Livingston Enterprise in the faith section on Friday. She's written 4 books, and she's just completed a labor of love on the history of the Bohleens. And do you want to tell us what the Bohleens? Well, welcome to Spotlight on History.
Thank you so much.
Well, when did the Bohleens come to the Shields Valley?
In 1937, they came to Montana earlier, but they came to Clyde Park, Montana in 1937.
Where did they first come to Montana?
Forest Grove. They came from Woonsocket, South Dakota. My grandpa, A.B. Bohleen, came from Sweden. And they first were in Minnesota, and then Woonsocket, South Dakota, westward ho, and then to Forest Grove, and quite a history over there. And then in 1937 to Clyde Park. And then my mom also came, her family came to Wilsow, Montana. And so my parents have been born, raised, and lived in Park County all of their lives.
And your mother is still alive.
Yes, she's 95.
And she's 95 years old, and her name is?
Lorraine Bohleen.
Lorraine, and her husband was?
Bud.
And they celebrated their 75th wedding anniversary.
That's right. Married 75 years. That's a long time, and they worked together, ranching back in the day. They did everything together. My mom baled hay and helped with the cattle, pulled calves, and did vaccinations and stuff, and they were side by side all those years. That's why it's so fun to share some of these pictures.
Well, what kind of cattle did they raise?
Well, they started out with Herefords, but then they went to Angus after a while, and they did the cow-calf operation until they were both in their 80s, and then they decided that getting up at night was just for the birds, or they were tired of it. And so then they went to yearlings after that, yes. So we did so many family things all the time I was growing up. I was born in Livingston in 1942. And all the time I was growing up, we had Christmas, Thanksgiving, Mother's Day, Father's Day, birthdays, all in a huge Bohleen family get-together, and then also on my mom's side, the Linnemans, we would get together as well. And knew all of our cousins, everybody just lived around Park County. And that was in the earlier days. Then, as time went on and kids started moving away and some of our relatives died, the family kept shrinking and shrinking. And I'm the oldest of the Bohleen cousins, and I've been a photographer of family events all of my life. And then the other thing, I love words. And I love collecting words and speaking words and everything about words. And so I kept all the newspaper clippings and stuff of our family through the years. So a year and a half ago, I decided I wanted all of my cousins to know the history of the Bohleen family. I had already done my mom's side of the family. And so I decided I'd like to do the Bohleen side and leave that legacy with them, and so that's what I did.
Well, did you have any partners in crime in the research?
No.
On this book? You did it all yourself?
Because I'm the oldest,
You're the oldest. Okay.
But I have to say that when there was a few things that, do you have a picture of this or do you have a picture of that? But my family have been, as I introduce you to the parts of the Bohleen family, others also love words and wrote stories. And I had kept all of those stories, particularly my Aunt Helen Streblow, who lived here in Livingston, and she loved to write the stories as well. I think our family heritage is storytellers. When we would sit around the table at all of those gatherings, we told stories, and they would either argue about Fords and Chevys, or Angus versus Herefords, and then they'd clear the table off and they'd set a Monopoly board on, and all of that was forgotten, and they'd have these rousing games of Monopoly. We still have that Monopoly board and all those original little pieces in our family. I feel very strongly that we need to keep the heritage of our family. And in the Bible, in the Old Testament, with the Israelites, there's a time where they say, keep these things, remember these things that have happened, and pass them down to your children and your children's children and your children's children. And I always loved that. And in the Old Testament, they built altars. You know, when God did something, they would build an altar. And so I feel like, and they'd say, so you can remember this. And I don't know about you, but we spend a whole lot of time trying to remember whose name is whose nowadays, and what did that, we can remember who bought that horse and they drove that old blue pickup, and you know, they were the ones that the sister was the school teacher up, you know, down there by the river or something, but we can't remember it all. And so I just feel very strongly we need to keep our family's histories, and I've spoken at that at several community organizations, that you need, somebody's got to be keeping your family's history. So my grandmother's history is called Times, Trials, Treasures, and Triumphs. It's a autobiography of Nancy Linneman. And when they came here, she was the youngest of 15 children, and they were living in a tent in North Dakota, and then moved to Wilsow, Montana, and came to Livingston and got on a train and moved to Wilsow. Maybe we can talk about that family another time. But anyway, what we did to form that history.
It's your time, Mother. I'm just here to listen.
That's all you get to do when you're around me. In this project for my cousins for the Bohleen Heritage, as I said, it took about a year and a half, and it has the obituary of every one of the family members. I think it's very important to save these in your family because it has all the facts with it. And I've been told that now and then an obituary can have a wrong date or a wrong thing, but I thought that's not my problem. I will do it with what I have, you know, to keep the obituaries and anything that was in print about these different relatives. And I just said, in the beginning of it, to my dear family, God has blessed us with a rich heritage. As I took pictures and kept clippings through the years, it didn't occur to me at the time I was keeping our histories and the personalities of our family. And that's what comes is the personalities come out of how our family maybe is unique from another family. Rodeo played such an important part in our family that there's a lot of history of that as well. And so I just wrote the good times of fun, food, and I started just showing them what was ahead was some of the pictures when the brothers went into the army, and this picture's in 1937 when they were coming to Park County. This is a picture of the family in Sweden taken in 1908, and then I put, the first thing I did was put a family tree, and that involved a lot of searching the early, the generation now. I had all of the older generation, but to find out now at the age we are, my cousins have grandchildren, and I wanted this included in this book, so that took a little more time. And this is the Bohleen family as they came to Montana. Perry, Andrew, Ellen, Halfrey, Arthur, Ruth, Esther, Eva, and Elmer. And this was the original Bohleen family. And my grandpa was the only one that stayed in Montana. The other brothers went to California and one had a walnut farm, and they were still farmers. Farming was big in maybe that came from their Swedish heritage, I don't know. Yes. And the other thing of note in my grandfather's history, my great aunt Ruth became one of the first missionaries in the Philippines. And she was captured by the Japanese and went into hiding up in the mountains for about 18 months. And then they were discovered, and they were brought down and put in a dance hall, and they were there a little over a year. And I have written her story in some of my books that, you know, it's in there. And that's another book yet to be coming, is about her history. But then she was rescued by General MacArthur and brought back to the United States, and the other sisters. But we'll go to the Park County. But this is my grandparents, and my grandfather, of course, is a farmer, and stories about him. Then the oldest of the Bohleen family was Lillian, and she married Carl Duke, and they lived here in Livingston, and she worked for the hospital for a number of years, the Lott Hospital. That's a private residence now. And then she worked at the Tesla elevator, doing books and stuff there. And I just found the pictures, and one of the marvelous things about the age in which we're living, this is so wonderful. When we're talking about how to do your family history, you can now take a picture of a photograph with your cell phone and then send it from your cell phone through your email to your PC computer, if that's where you're doing your history, and download those pictures into the history, or then take them to, I think my bill was like $600 and some at copying all of these photographs, because I wanted them copied on good glossy paper, you know, that would show the people well. And of course some of them were black and white. The black and white copy far better and last longer, I found, when I dug back. Some of the color pictures you could barely see. But you can use your cell phone now. You know, and they could send me. I could text my cousins and say, do you have a picture of Calvin in the rodeo and such a day? And they could send it back to me in a text, and I could get it printed for this book. So there's some things that are a whole lot easier, and so you can do them now. And of course, I have their obituaries, I have their 25th wedding anniversary, and some things about Helen and Lillian as these two sisters. They were quite the sisters, and they were in Forest Grove. When they lived there, they had to go stay in Lewistown to go to high school, because there was no transportation between. And they were quite popular, these young ladies, and very attractive, and I was so happy to find this picture of them. Isn't that just a delight? The color's kind of fading a bit, and I wish we had time to read you, like on the back of this photograph. Let me see if I can get part of it. He waded, this was Carl, waded the Yellowstone River to his waist that day and saved a horse that was swimming for his life with a wagon and a dead horse beside. The team was hitched to the wagons, was floating down the Yellowstone River. The lines had evidently pulled the dead horse under. Sonny and Carl were both in the water. They cut the lines off and got the horse out. Several men were there and helped Carl, and then Sonny to catch it. I mean, that was on the back of a photograph. Isn't that something? So then that Lillian is the first one of the Bohleen children, and then Helen is the second. My wonderful memory of Helen and Bert is living at 114 North B in that house that's now 120 years old.
Like a paint, I think.
Oh yes, I have pictures of her paintings.
Oh.
But you could go anytime, because all the rest of us lived out in the country. You could go anytime to Bert and Helen's and stop in and get a cup of coffee. And that's why the first picture I put on their page was their living room, because it was so precious to our family. And also, a thing important about them, Bert's, see, this trout was 11 pounds. I can't read the ounces.
Four
And
ounces.
it's on the wall of Dan Bailey's fly shop, was one of the big fish. And I found that through the history. Their daughter is Pat Ammon. She's also an artist. And then Pat married Bob Ammon here in Livingston and went to high school here. And their daughter Valerie is now really getting well known across the country as an artist. So down through the years, and so I also put an article about all three of them. But the other thing I had to put in here is something about our family's handwriting. My grandmother, the aunts and uncles, they had the most beautiful handwriting.
Oh, Rebecca?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. With the alphabet up on the school walls, and you're making the circles and all of that. But their handwriting, my Uncle Sonny, I've got a copy of his handwriting. So I'm just giving you some ideas of things. You know, you can cover so much in a family history. Other pictures of Bert and Helen. And then we go to my Uncle Sonny. And he was the first boy. Lillian and Helen were first. And then Uncle Sonny lived up Paradise Valley after he left the family ranch. And so he was a bachelor for many, many years. And my great aunt Ruth, the missionary from the Philippines, loved my Uncle Sonny so much, you know, and she would write him letters all the time before she got captured in the Philippines. And I found this picture of the two of them together. And so I wanted to put things in that, you know, were really extra special in the time in which they were living. And of course, Sonny was a calf roper and rodeoed all. I don't remember for the years growing up, Sundays we'd hook up our horse trailer and head off somewhere in Montana or Wyoming for a rodeo, or to watch somebody else in our family be in a rodeo. And actually where I live right now on the ranch today is where the catch pen was. My folks built a house up at the other end of the arena from our original ranch original house on the Deer Creek, which is where my folks' ranch is. And that original house was up there. And then in 1985, my mom and dad built a log house down where our Bohleen arena was. So they're at one end of the arena now, their home. And my house is at the other end of the arena in the catch pen. So we love talking about people that are very well known that came there and roped and bulldogged with the Bohleen brothers on the ranch, some of his buckles. This is when we went back to Forest Grove, Montana, and they're standing on the steps of the Forest Grove school that they attended as kids. And then here's some of love to read. We all love to read. That's been passed down generation through generation. I had to put in a picture of Sonny's house because it was a bachelor house, but it also was where we had Thanksgiving dinner every year. And I have the desk that sat in where he kept the coffee pot, and there's a burned ring in that desk where the coffee pot was, because he didn't really believe, even with his electric plug-in coffee pot, he still just added more coffee every day. A little more coffee, a little more water, a little more coffee, till somebody would come and pour it out and start over. He had a little grave to build there. And then just some of this is a good picture of many. I suppose there's probably 40 people there that were at Thanksgiving dinner at my Uncle Sonny's.
It almost looks like a family reunion.
Yeah, but it wasn't. It was just Thanksgiving. So then this is the next brother, and this is Roger. And Roger and his wife Nova, who was a Jones, lived at Wilsall. Their ranch was up above, closer to the Crazy Mountains. And those kids, their two children, Calvin and Susan, went to Porcupine School. And Calvin and Susie were 10 months apart, so they were practically like twins. And this is one of my favorite pictures in the whole book. They must have got a dollhouse and a barn for Christmas. Look at all the little pieces and parts, and the two little kids standing in the living room. Christmas was a big deal back then,
yes,
you know. The tree would be about this deep and with gifts, you know, but everybody bought for everybody, and there was always joke gifts in it and things that didn't cost very much money, but very, very, very important memories. And then, of course, their obituaries. And then the next child in the Bohleen family was a girl, and her name was Bessie. And she married Carl Nordgren, who lived here in Livingston. And they were only married 2 years when she died of a kidney disease. But Roger and my dad and Carl were all in the Army. I'm sure it was 1943. So they sent this telegram that I have a copy of. This was the one to his dad. Bessie passed away today at 3 o'clock, come if you can. And what a sad time for the family. Carl and Bessie had only been married 2 years. And I believe he was, I can't remember exactly without looking where he was in the service at the time, but all 3 boys came home for the funeral. And my dad always said, you know, you didn't just get on a plane and hop to and from countries back then at that time. And one of the saddest days in my dad's life was after Bessie's funeral, taking Carl out where the truck stop is on the highway going over to Bozeman to hitchhike to get back to the base in Washington to go back where he was stationed. And the same for when my dad came home from the service, he hitchhiked home as well. You know, you didn't always have some conveyance to get there. My dad said that the reason he hitchhiked is he couldn't wait to get home, and so he wanted the fastest way possible. He thought he could go faster than the train.
Was there a bus?
There probably was a bus, but he hitchhiked and came back home. They got to Bozeman. He got off the train. My mom gave him a pair of Levi's, and they went to a rodeo on that day.
More than like this story.
That's right. So these pictures with Bessie are very precious. Oops, excuse me. And the pictures of them. And Carl went on and lived his entire life in Livingston. So then my dad was the next one born. His name was Arthur B. Bohleen. My grandpa is Arthur Benjamin Bohleen Sr. My dad was Arthur B. Bohleen Jr. And then Sonny's name was actually Alan J. Bohleen. And then when the last Andy was born, he was A.R. Bohleen. And banks weren't as, I'll just say it was all in pencil back then, maybe, or whatever it was. And they'd get their accounts mixed up all the time. I think there was only 1 or 2 banks in Livingston. And so my dad one time he was called Bud from an early age because he liked spuds and turned to Bud. And so he said, I'm going by Bud. So he legally went by Bud thereafter, so that maybe if it's a VA paper or something, it's still got Arthur B, but he went by Bud Bohleen. And then my mom was Lorraine Adams. My mom had a similar, more tragic story. Bill Adams and Nancy Williamson went to a dance at Sedan up in Belleville South, and 6 weeks later they got on a train in Wilsall and came to Livingston and were married. And they had 2 years together, and he worked in a hotel at Clyde Park, and they lived at Clyde Park. And he died suddenly when my mom was 2 years old of a heart condition, and her sister Alice was just months old. 6 weeks after that, my grandmother got smallpox, and they were quarantined for 6 weeks, and that's a whole other story. My mom's still riding her four-wheeler at 95. She goes down, gets the mail, and with her four-wheeler. And here they are. This is a picture. My brother Ron lives in Big Piney, Wyoming. My dad was a bull rider, and Andy would ride bulls. Sonny roped. My brother was a calf roper, and I even did barrel racing back in the day, but the horse was better than me, so we didn't have as long a career as some of the others. Carl and Roger were in fencing for a time. So our family was very, intertwined in each other's lives. So I love the old pictures of them in the shaps and some of the hunting camps. Another thing along with rodeo, hunting was a big thing because you couldn't eat that beef on your ranch, you had to save that. So you'd eat wild meat, often a lot. This is Andy, and they had 3 sons, Gene, Mike, and Dan. These are some of the hunting camp pictures. And then now we're done with the family history of that part. So now I go into things that I want my cousins to be sure and know and remember. And this is our rodeo heritage. And here's pictures of the different Sonny, Andy, and all. But here is rodeos up Bracket Creek in 1943 through 1945. they had rodeos. I mean, different ranches. I remember being at Chico Hot Springs, I don't know how many times, hanging on a fence. And Sonny would be roping, and Dad and Andy would be riding bulls, and we'd be going.
There was an arena in Chico?
Yeah. But not only were part of the family rodeo people, then Lillian and Carl and Helen and Bert belonged to the Livingston Saddle Club, which is a great big social thing.
Well, I noticed on one of these photographs, you say the Bridgemans, like, I remember Russell Bridgman.
Yes, this was their place.
This was their place.
Yes. Look at how they're dressed for the rodeos. Split first. Roger must have won. Roger split first.
Okay.
That was probably riding the bull. Then I just wanted to add all the other family members, and now you know we will get more about Calvin. But Calvin, Roger, Nova's son, was in a rodeo. I can't remember the place right off the top of my head. Anyway, a bull stepped on him.
Madison Square Garden.
Yes, it was Madison Square.
He told me the story.
Yes, and so he was a quadriplegic the rest of his life. That happened in about 1969, and he was a quadriplegic for the rest of his life. He was married to Susie Edlin, and he became a cattle buyer and a rancher as well, and they had some horses that ran in rodeos and in races, and then he also was an artist. This is my brother Ron, and he has remained true to the history of maybe I should say the original cowboy. He now lives in Big Piney, Wyoming, and they don't ride four-wheelers down there. Everything's done on horses. My brother probably rides up until the last 2 years, 350 days out of a year he's riding. And they might be herding 1,500 head of cattle across the Green River, or, I mean, he is just right up there with, I don't know, John Wayne or whoever. The things that he's done with his life, and mentored many kids, done much with horses and helping people with buying and selling horses and all of that kind of thing, and just a help to all the ranches down there. This is a picture of him when he came back when my mom and dad sold their cows and calves, and he brought his horse back from Wyoming to do that. The reason I have this picture, I paid $20 to go. A museum person would know this. Archives,
Yes.
Go clear back in the archives, and it cost me $20 to get this picture. And when it came through, you could hardly see it. But it was the favorite picture of my brother roping at a rodeo in Great Falls, and the headline, it was on the front page, and the headline was, "It Takes Two." And it shows the horse and him, and I know that's how he felt about it. His horse was as important as he was, you know. Their daughter went on to be Miss Rodeo Montana when they lived here. And then this is Gene, and he's team tying. Here's Mike riding bulls. These are all my cousins. Calvin again. And then I wrote a fabulous story. I'll see that you get a copy of this. On the seasons of ranching when they branded out at Sonny's, and all the crew was over 80 years old. And it's a fabulous story.
Well, what year was this?
About 2000, maybe.
Not that long ago.
I'm really not good with numbers.
Well, no, but not that long ago.
Well,
I mean,
no, relatively speaking, 20 years ago.
we're still in the 21st century.
Yes. And the only one that was younger than 80 was Pat's daughter, Valerie, and they had her help, and she was a big part. It's a wonderful story.
Okay.
It's a marvelous story. The next generations, I wanted to include all of the cousins, and here's when my brother made chaps for his grandson, and this is my grandson wearing chaps that my mother made for him. And then we go through all the generations down until January 19th, 2019, my first great-granddaughter was born, and her mom is a ranch gal from Belfry, and they've already had her on a horse. So that's the generations going on. It's in the blood, you know. And we know that it's in our blood that some like Chivys and some like Ford. You can't change the blood. You know, it's just in there, these things. So rodeo too. So then I said, times are changing. Here is the horses and all, and then here's my mom and dad moving cattle on four-wheelers. And this is hay. Look at the stacks of hay. When it was loose, you know, when they do it all with horses and all. This was a wedding last summer. I said, times are changing. This was one of my cousin's kids' marriage. Not one of those my cousins can button their suit jackets.
Not even, oh, no,
So this book tells all. I mean, we just thought we're going to be as honest as we can. So now we start with the next generation, and this is cousins and grandkids. I love this picture because this is Calvin and Susie, Pat, Ronnie, and I, probably in 1959 or 60 on my mom's couch with our hair piled high because that was the style. And so this is the 5 cousins. And then later, Mike, Dan, and Jean were born, and so there are 8 of us. And so now I just did pictures, all of us cousins. I'm like, you aren't even going to have to go through all of that. Cousins, and then right here is 5 generations. My grandpa, A.B. Bohleen, my dad, Bud Bohleen, and then myself and Todd and Kevin, 2 of our kids. And now here's 5 generations. My mom, me, my son Todd, his son Tyler, and Casey that was born in January. So I'm thankful that we've got those pictures.
What a lineage.
I know, isn't that something? And now it's cousins, kids, grandkids, and I just go on. And many of these, the other thing I would advise people is you can go on Facebook, you know, nowadays, and if I found a picture I really wanted of one of my cousins, I would click on that and send it to my email and then send it to my computer and print it that way, because I didn't want them to have to go back, you know, sometimes look through shoeboxes to find pictures. But it's another way that you can go on the internet and type in your relative's name, and then you may get some information or pictures that way.
Well, whether people are watching or listening to this conversation, I hope they are, they want to do the same thing that you've done.
Yes.
This is a huge tip.
Oh, it's important. It is so important, and the ways to do it, you know, are. I hope that helps them some way. The reason I should tell you right now, while we're talking mechanics again, the reason I did it in a loose leaf binder and with sleeves is I am expecting more information to come. You know, like from their family, they might want to put more about their parents in that section, or they might want to add on to the end. And I forgot when I was doing my brother, he's real well known in Wyoming for making tiny stagecoaches and farm machinery by hand, just like a sheep wagon with little teeny stove and little teeny, I don't know how he does it.
Oh, he uses a real miniature?
Yes, and they're I think there's one in the Cody Museum now, and they're buying them for museums because he's doing that. And I forgot to put pictures of that in here, so I'm so thankful. If you have loose leaf, then you can add things to it, or I thought maybe I have a mistake and then we can fix it. So that's going, we've had 2 weddings at our ranch. Both of my grandsons were married at the ranch, so that was another thing that was fun to put in there. And then good pictures of my cousins being grandparents. Another thing that was fun to put in, this is a picture of my mom, and she made my first grandson a guitar out of a stick of wood and a duct tape over a Cheerios box. And then here she is later when she found him a little guitar, and they're playing guitars. And Justin is now in a world band it's a heavy metal Christian rock band called Righteous Vendetta. Matter of fact, this month he's going to Europe and this band was formed out of Cody, Wyoming. 11 years they've been doing this band, very successful. Zach Goggins is from Pat Goggins' grandson in Billings, is one of the members of the band.
He had the livestock guy.
Yes, yeah. His grandson is one of the members of the band. And
Does he still have that original guitar?
I don't know if he does or not. I should find out, yes. Isn't that a neat story?
Because somebody said that is a musician, he had stacks and stacks of guitars. And I said, do you still have your first guitar? Yeah, it's down there. Well, once you play the guitar, you just keep adding. You never trade it in.
Oh, no. I think Justin has about 7. I've been in his studio. He's writing music for Disney and all kinds of TV shows and stuff now. So, and the reason I wanted that in there is we have value as grandparents. We have value when we pass on and trade, teach things. Whether it's cooking, making jelly, or whether it's how to rope or whatever it is, you never know how that's going to turn out. And I wanted my cousins, and if they give this book on down, to see it counts to be vested in your grandkids, even if you have to do it by email. All right, so we're going on through with that. And then I said, an intermission, some stories from a book I compiled for my aunts and uncles at Christmas 1981. And I put together a little book about Christmas in our family. So I put that in there. Now here's the pictures, some of the paintings, which some Robert and I had purchased from Valerie and from Pat. And then some they gave me copies of their art. And then here's the Bohleen gatherings. And I just did a montage I just cut up a whole bunch of pictures of family dinners and put them all together. So there's probably 40 pictures in these 2 pages, but by cutting them up, I could get everybody in the picture that's been in our family. This is one of my favorite pictures too. This is at Sonny's, my Uncle Sonny's for Thanksgiving dinner. And here is Susie, Calvin's wife, Kathy, my daughter-in-law, and my mom going through all the Thanksgiving ads to get the sales for tomorrow.
What do you have to be out at 5 o'clock in the morning to get those $9 crock pots?
Oh, sure. And then in 1998, we had a Bohleen family reunion with all the California, all of them at the ranch. And here, there was about 130 people came. And the Ringling Five played for the reunion. This is the military, all of our family members that have been in the military, including those first 3, Roger, Dad, and Carl. And then Bert was in the Seabees. My husband was in the Navy. This is our grandson, Dustin, who went to Korea. My dad had been in Korea. Now my grandson went to Korea also. He went to Afghanistan and Iran too, and then JR was in the Navy as well.
Then he's wearing his Grandpa Bud's jacket?
Yes.
Oh, that's so special.
That's something.
Oh.
That's just priceless. Then this was funny hats. Back in the day we wore hats. Crying out loud, look here. And if you ever knew Carl Norgren, in Livingston, he always wore that, do you call it a pith helmet?
Yeah.
So, okay.
Somebody's got a shiny metal.
It's just fun. It's so fun. Well, anyway, then here is some of the cousins that my husband has gone to heaven, and Bob Ann and Jean's wife, Marcy, and then Calvin. And this was an article I wrote about Calvin. And then Susan, my cousin, died in March. And so then we start with some of the publicity of Calvin, all the articles that were written about him. He was the outstanding JC in America when Bill Clinton was there, and pictures of him. We're getting close to the end. I wrote in the book, and now a really special treat. We are winding down our memories, stories from the past, some in original form and some retyped for clarity. And so this is when Helen took a bus ride to Yellowstone. I mean, I can't even tell you all the stories, but even here is my grandfather.
You remember Helen Struggling?
Yes.
Okay.
They got on a bus. Have you heard that story?
No.
Like in 1932? Was it 1926? It was a white park bus, and she and Bessie were going to California. Not Bessie, Nova. She and Nova were going to California, and when they got on the bus driver couldn't shift. She didn't know how to shift. So Helen, and this is a marvelous story, we read it at her funeral. She sat on the steps in the bus all the way to California, and when they go down a hill, you'd have to shift down, and Helen would shift down all the way to. Faith had never double clutched, so when she drove, I would sit in the front seat to the left of the driver. Every time she needed more power, I would double clutch and then move back in my special seat. There were no interstates in the 1940s that I can remember. There were 2-lane highways back then with lots of little hills and dips along the way. When we went through Idaho Falls, there were people on the street that stared at us. We blew our very special horn at them. It was an awesome sound. We had to pull a long cord to honk, and it sounded like a clamorous miniature train whistle. Let's see where there was another one about. We saw war signs all along the way, reminding us indeed that we were still at war. Everyone from grandparents to kids was trying to help win the war. Victory gardens were everywhere. We saw headlines in newspapers and information on nylons, war bonds, sugar, shoes printed on signs for shoes printed on signs in cafes and gas stations. We did stop at Winnemucca to swim and on Donner Pass to take our pictures. Isn't that something? I've always loved, and here's pictures of the bus. She had pictures of, and because they're old, but the other passengers, here's their picture on Donner Pass in the 1926 bus. All right, I'm going to finish with one more story that's in here that's just really fun. From Forest Grove School when we went back, and I think I got my interest in how important family heritage was because they wanted to go back to Forest Grove, and we could see the houses where they lived. My grandpa had helped build one of the houses, and where they went to school. And my dad always talked about going to school at Forest Grove and all these stories. So we went with them. And so all of the brothers, or most of the brothers, and Helen and Lillian, and all of us trekked over there. We stayed overnight in a motel, and we did this twice. And then we did it one more time when not as many were alive still. But we went over there. Well, my dad's was a horrible speller. He just could not spell. He could do numbers. I got to tell you this. Remind me of the table. Okay, then that's it. Then we're winding down. Okay, so when he went to school, he couldn't spell, but he loved baseball. He only went to school to play baseball, and it was recess time. And he knew he was up to bat next because they just kept a running game. And so the teacher corrected his spelling, and he misspelled Montana. And she told him that he had to write Montana on the board, all over the board, before he could go out to recess. So he got the chalk, and the blackboard was as big as this whole wall here in your museum. The blackboard or chalkboard went clear across there, and he just took the chalk and with as big as swings as he could make, he wrote Montana like this all over that board once. Just grabbed his glove and headed out to the baseball field. I should tell you that she brought him back in. He had to write Montana about 300 times.
She explained it very well, did she?
So, it's so fun. And in this book is a picture of him standing in front of that blackboard.
Really?
When we went back over there again, I speak of the figures. Another memory is that in my grandparents' kitchen, enamel table, remember the table? Well, in the Bohleen family, they all figured, you didn't figure or do numbers. you figured how many cows, you figured how much water you needed, you figured, what grain you'd get or what you had left in the granary. And all the time growing up, as long as I can remember, all over that table there'd be figures, and they'd tell my mom, my grandma, don't wash those off, we gotta have those, And eventually she must have got them trained some so they would write on envelopes. And they'd always say, don't throw that away, because my figures are up there. And I now have that table. Now I'm doing jigsaw puzzles on it. So I'll go to the last page. And the last page. And I put some pictures in that came later, And it says, and onward to this is really important. Onward to the next generation. Webster's dictionary says heritage, that which comes or belongs to one by reason of birth, an inherited lot or portion. Family, the definition is parents and their children, whether dwelling together or not, the children of one person or one couple collectively, a group of persons that are closely related by blood, such as parents, children, aunts, uncles, and cousins. May God's blessing be on us as well. Now to him who is able to do above and beyond all that we ask or think, according to the power that works within us. To him be glory in the church and Jesus Christ to all generations, forever and ever. I found that verse, that's kind of the doxology, or not doxology, but the benediction. Remember, that used to be in different kinds of churches. And I thought, because of my grandparents' faith and the faith down through the generations and believing in God, that's how I wanted to end it. And then I put the picture of Casey Lorraine that was born. She's named after my mom, and she was born January 18th, 2019. So on to the next generation. And
Whoa.
That's how you do it.
Oh, wow.
And this is my Uncle Sonny.
Okay.
Out in Paradise Valley.
Okay.
For the front cover and the back cover is my brother on his horse. Because I just thought that was an important part.
Well, I just want to, I want to thank you so much for.
I think before we finish too, I would like to say that with the Bohleen brothers and sisters, Helen and Lillian and Sunny and Bessie and I forgot anybody yet, and Dad and Andy, that then my cousins are Roger's two kids, Calvin and Susie, and Helen and Bert's daughter, Pat, and then my brother and I, Ron and I, and then Andy and Doris's three boys, Jean, Mike, and Dan, are the ones that are now wanting to pass the heritage that we so wondrously received back in the day when we were together as a family so much more. Now it's like weddings or funerals that we're maybe together. And I have the picture of the last time, that wedding, when I think there's however many cousins of us left now. What a joy. And the future generations would not know all these things if they get to see it or not. But it was a joy to do it for my family. And I'm telling you, I was so glad when I got them done and sent in the mail to all of them.
This is Jay Kiefer for Spotlight on the History of the Yellowstone Gateway Museum at Lois Olmstead. So great to see you again. Thanks again.